Jeff from Two Hacks Garage. Well, I'm back in my garage doing some more math. You know, all that fun stuff you learned in school that you thought you would never use. Well, in today's world, for me, I'm actually using it. Math and geometry come into play quite often when it's building a car, especially when building an engine. In that last video, I showed you how to properly weigh pistons, and what that was going to help you do is determine to see if any material needed to be removed to make sure all your pistons match in weight, because that's part of a bigger picture when it comes to balancing them. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how to measure pistons, so when you go to machine this engine, you'll know your bore. Because is 60 over? Really 60 over? In most cases, most likely, but some custom applications, probably not. So what I have here is I have two pistons. These are for small block Chevys. This one's for a 283 and this one's for a 302. This is a 60 over application, and this is also a 60 over application. This one, its final displacement will make 292, and this one will make 311. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to measure the diameter of the pistons and then determine, based upon your application, what the final bore size needs to be. It's really not that hard, guys. Some specialty tools are required for this. But you know what, guys? It's just a little bit of patience, a little bit of tools, and a little bit of time. With that, guys, let me show you what we're working with. All right, so here's what I'm working with. I've got my pistons. I've got a pair of calipers, and I've got a set of micrometers. If you notice, I have two, and I just set these up and calibrate them to make sure they're correct. The reason why I have a set of two is for the 302 engine, that's a 4-inch and larger bore. And for the 283 engine, factory was 3.875, and the final bore is going to be 3.935. So that's under 4 inches. So if you look here, I got 4 to 5, and I've got 3 to 4. This is going to come in handy down the road, and I'll explain why. But what else I got? Well, I got the boxes. Why are the boxes important? Here's why. If you look for the pistons that I have for the 302, it's going to tell you the skirt size. It's going to tell you the measuring point. We'll go over that later. And it's going to tell you your minimum clearance. This is where math also plays in. This is all going in millimeters, and I do mine in inches. So you'll have to go and you'll have to convert this all over from millimeters to inches. Anyway, let's go to the next one. The 283 pistons. Well, it's also going to tell you a lot of relevant information. It's going to tell you the standard bore of it, stroke, rod, pin, compression height, all that. We don't need to know that right now, but we're going to need to know is minimum clearance on that. And the nice part about this is it does come with some spec sheets. It tells you where to measure on here. It tells you different clearances based upon application and all that fun jazz. We're going to get into that later, but you know what? That's what we're working with. So that's what you're going to need is you're going to need your pistons, you're going to need calipers, and you're going to need a set of mics. And obviously you're going to need some reference points with that. With that, guys, let's get started on this. All right, guys, so the first step of this, you kind of got to know what you're working with. We're going to start off with the piston that is the 60 over for the 283 block to get our 292 cubic inches. This is a hypereutectic piston. Little bit of knowledge on these. The hypereutectic pistons, they don't grow / swell as much under heat per se as like a forged piston. Forged piston is stronger. It's better for a whole lot of different racing applications and so on. But the forged pistons, they seem to want to grow / swell under heat. We'll get to that later. That's going to play in factor when we go to measure that. So, a little information you need to know. I always take notes. I have a whole book full of notes. It always comes in handy. But the 283, the factory bore is 3.875. Advertised 60 over would be a 3.935. Minimum clearance, as stated, on the Keith Black piston sheet here is 1.5 thousandths to 4.5 thousandths max. My target clearance is 3 thousandths. Where did I get that? Well, it's pretty simple. If you look at this sheet here, general clearance guides, you have it for piston to wall clearance for these two different bore sizes. Now, granted, I'm under that bore size, but after consulting with Keith Black, they told me to go on this chart. From there, you kind of need to know what you're working with. Here's all the different applications to set your clearances. Could I go street naturally aspirated? I could, but I'm not going to, and here's why. This engine's going to see a lot of RPMs, probably get beat on a whole lot, even though it's a street strip engine. I'm going to go with the dry gasoline. So that's telling me right there, 1.5 to 4.5 thousandths. I'm going to shoot for somewhere in the middle, right there for 3.5 thousandths. So my target clearance, minimum, maximum, I'm kind of going right in the middle. So we have our factory bore. We have our advertised 60 over bore. Now what we need to do, guys, is we're going to need to measure our piston measurement. And you know what? We're going to show you that the easy way. But first off, you need to know where to measure these pistons. Well, if you look here on the sheet supplied, every piston manufacturer should supply one of these sheets. It tells you the installing instructions, all that stuff. But if you look here, measurement point. Measure even with the bottom of the wrist pin pad and 90 degrees to the pin. So here's your wrist pin pad right here, because that's illustrating your wrist pin, and here's the pad. So it's saying 90 degrees over here is your measuring point. A lot of pistons, including this one, if you were to look, same thing. There's your measuring pad, 90 degrees. And if you turn this around, a lot of pistons do have measuring points on each side for your micrometers. So once you have your measuring point established, you'll know where to put your micrometer on there and get an accurate measurement. With that, guys, now that we have our basic information needed, we do need to know what that piston measurement is to come up with our final bore size. So in this case, we're going to find out is 60 over actually 60 over. Let's get measuring. All right, so this is where we're going to actually measure this piston here. I'm going to try to get this on camera as best as I can. But like I said, you have your measuring points here, and you have your measuring points here. Those points are 90 degrees from the bottom of the pin pad. So this is where you're going to need a micrometer. And if you notice, this one is labeled 3 to 4 thousandths, and it gives you your measurement scale to the accuracy. So what I'm going to do is I am going to see if I can zoom in on here a little bit. Sometimes it's hard to film and do this all at the same time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on those pin pads, measuring points, whatever you want to call them. And I'm going to get a measurement. And you don't want to over tighten these, but you do want to make sure they're centered. You just want to play around with it a little bit and a few times. So I know that's not centered right now. Takes a little bit of practice. Like I said, you don't go over tight with it. Okay. So just get my accurate measurement right there. And you're going to want to make it so it's just barely snug on there. Nothing crazy out of the sorts with that. All right. So if you look here, after getting that measurement, I'm at 3,925 on that scale, because if you look at the scale on that, you got each tick mark is 2.5 thousand. So it's 3,925, and then you're going to add this point here, 5, 6, 7. So if you do your math on that, your calculation based upon that, 3,925 plus 7 thousandths is going to be 3.932. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write that down. So the actual piston measurement is 3.932. 932 thousandths of an inch. Okay, so that's what the actual piston measured. And I measure every single piston. I just don't measure one. I go through and measure them actually, 2 or 3 times just to make sure I get everything accurately correct. You always want to make sure you do calibrate your your micrometer. But you notice here, I have that as number 1. So this is going to go to cylinder 1. I label everything. So what I'm going to do on here is I'm going to write down the number on this. That's going to come important down the road. We'll explain why in another video. So where are we at with that? Well, take a look, guys. 3.932. Our target clearance on this is 3.5 thousandths. So when you do the math on that, 3.935. 3.935. So that is our final bore. So in this case, 60 over was actually 60 over based upon our clearance. Your clearance is always going to tell you your final bore. That right there, that's just a general guideline of what this piston is meant for. So yes, in our case, our final bore size is 3.935 with their added clearance. So yeah, this one is technically a 60 over bore piston. So that's going to make us 292 cubic inches. With that, guys, we're going to go to the next one. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go on to the forged piston that's going to be used in the 302-based engine. Like I said, forged pistons tend to grow, swell under heat. Modern metallurgy, they don't do it as bad as they used to, so I got to factor that in. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and measure this one here soon. But just like with the 283-based 292, our 302 forged pistons, you need to know the factory bore. This is the advertised 060 over, so that would be your advertised bore right there. This did not come with one of those fancy spec sheets that Keith Black had supplied for us. However, on the box, like I showed you earlier, right here, it does say minimum clearance. You have to convert that over to what I'm just going to say, English. So the minimum clearance on that was 5 thousandths. It had no maximum clearance. But seeing this is a race engine, I'm going to add a couple thousandths clearance in here because this is going to grow. I'm going to target 7 thousandths piston to wall clearance. I know that sounds maybe a little bit loose, but when they're saying your minimum clearance is 5 thousandths, I'm going to go for 7 thousandths. I'm sure you could probably go closer to 9 if you really wanted to, but seeing this is a 60 over bore, I'm going to keep it around the 7 thousandths range. So what we have to do is we're going to have to measure our piston on this. Now, this is a little bit different. It's a little bit deceiving. Here's why. If you look on this piston, you're going to think it has a measurement window. Well, theoretically speaking, a lot of people might use that. However, when you look at the box, it tells you your measuring point. So that's saying 57.66 millimeters from top of the head. This right here is the top of the head of your piston. You're probably wondering, well, how do you get that? I'm going to show you how to get that right now. All right, so first off, you're going to have to know what 57.66 millimeters is in English, as I'm going to call it. Well, that's 2.27 inches. So what I did is, like I said earlier, pair of calipers are going to come in handy. We're not measuring it with this point on it. Calipers have a depth gauge at the bottom right here. So what I did was I converted my math, and I went ahead and set this to 2.27 inches. And what I'm going to do, based upon that, actually I need to recalibrate that 1 second. Just resetting my gauge so it's accurate. There we go. So I have the caliper set at 2.27 inches. And I'm going to lock it in place. So what you're going to need to do, seeing this is also a depth gauge, is you're going to take that and you're going to put it on the top of that. And if you look, right there, it's going to give me that mark. So if you look on that S or that lightning bolt, it's right in the middle of that. So what I'm going to do is I've already done a few of these. I'm going to put a dot on there with a marker so I know my measuring point. Also, I'm going to do the same thing over here, and it comes to the same mark. Now, if you saw on the other one, and it's also kind of a general rule of thumb, bottom of your wrist pin pad right here, 90 degrees. So when you follow that 90 degrees, that's where it happens. So that general rule of thumb, bottom of the wrist pin pad, follow that over 90 degrees. That's where that dot lines up. So yeah, like I said, it didn't come with the fancy instructions. However, it does give you a measurement point on the box, and you're always going to want to know that measuring point. Because if you were to measure off that pad right there, it's going to be different than down here. Because pistons, they're kind of wedge-shaped, if you want to call it. Your measurement up here is not going to be the same as down here. This is going to be wider than it is up here. So you just need to make sure you always get the accurate measuring point. Now, like I said, rule of thumb, bottom of pin pad, 90 degrees over. Here, what I did is I just made a mark on there. And now, guys, I can go ahead and get measuring. All right, so it's the same exercise as before. And if you notice here, I'm using a 4 to 5 inch micrometer because this piston is larger than a 4-inch bore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my micrometer. Actually, sometimes what I do is I will actually take these out to the size on here of where the measurement should be. So this one is going to be 40, well, theoretically speaking. It's going to dial that in to a rough measurement right there to get it close. I'm going to put it on those marks. Like I said, this takes a little bit of practice, and you know, just keep practicing with it. Like I said, you don't have to go real crazy with it. All right. So my final measurement on this micrometer is 40, and if you look, it's the half point, 4056. I know that's kind of hard to read right there, but if you look there, 0, that tick mark past that is 25, the next one's 50. So it's 405, and then you're going to add this, 6. 4056. That's what my piston measures. Now, let's go do the math to see if 60 over is actually 60 over. So just like with all the other pistons, I have labeled, like all my other parts. And you'll see me as I go through this engine build, how everything's labeled and how that will actually play into when we actually go to assemble this thing. So what I'm going to do is, like I said, I will measure every single one. But I'm going to go ahead and write on here the diameter of that piston. So I know that now, it's marked. Now I need to do some math. So piston measurement came out at 4056. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to add these numbers together. What does this number come out to? Well, if you follow the math, 40, then you got your 70 and your 56. You're going to have to add that up. Right there. So, in this case now, is it 60 over? No. In this case here, it's going to be 4063. So your advertised 60 over. In my case, based upon piston to wall clearance and my application, it's 4063. So where did we end up with that after doing all of our math? Well, if you see here, factory bore size, advertised 60 thousandths is 4060. Based upon our target clearance of where I want to go with this, based upon my application, and mind you, applications vary, just like on this Keith Black chart. Got to remember, mine's going to be drag alcohol. So I really got to add some clearances into that. So based upon that and measuring my piston, you add these two numbers together, your actual piston measurement, your desired clearance in there, like I said, based upon application, final bore size 4063. That still makes the 311 cubic inches. This was like 310.89 based upon 60 over, and when you factor in this size, it's like 311.17. So yeah, it's going to be 311 cubic inches. So is 60 over 60 over? Yes. No. That's just an advertised number when you hear 10 over, 30 over, 40 over, 60 over. Those are just general guidelines based upon the pistons they manufacture and based upon, common machining practices. So in my case, yes and no. Like I said, piston materials matter, applications matter, all of that fun jazz matters. And you guys, tell you what, this is the fun math, as I call it. And we're going to get into a whole lot more of this. Oh, and by the way, guys, if you ever want to calculate your actual bore or actual total cubic inches, there's a lot of good resources online that help you calculate that. And I might do a video on that math calculation. It's quite hot rod nerdy. But as you can see, guys, it isn't really that hard to do, and this will help you down the road when you go to machine an engine, which I'm going to probably start doing on this one this weekend, and we'll talk about all these numbers when we get into that. But with that, guys, I really hope you learned something new on this. Like I said, I measure every single one of them, I mark everything, and I always keep notes. But this stuff isn't really that hard to do. It's just a little bit of math, a little bit of time, some measuring tools, and you know what, guys? That math that everyone hated in school, it will come in handy. With that, till the next one, see ya.